This is JROKK. I just got done spending 26 years in prison, and I'm chatting with Staxx.
Welcome to this episode of Chattin with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got JROKK. What's up, man?
Hey, how's it going, bro? Thanks for having me on here.
Thank you. No problem. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time. So where were you born and raised?
I was born in Vancouver, Washington, but I was raised in California, Bay Area, and then up by the Sacramento area is basically more where I grew up at until I was 18.
And what was your early life like?
Life back then was a lot different than it is now, obviously, for people. I mean, us growing up as kids, it was a different type of world back then. So, it was definitely, discipline back then was a belt and things like that. If you did something wrong, it wasn't, going to timeout. It was, getting your ass beat with a belt. So, it was a different story. My parents, my mom, left my biological father when I was 2. He was extremely violent drunk, and so he used to beat my mom and me profusely when when I was younger, and beat her. So she left him, and then went and married my stepfather. They were drug addicts. So my life growing up, definitely was probably like a lot of kids back then. So it was a different time. It wasn't a thing. I can remember being probably 5 years old, and I used to run around the Bay Area by myself, at 5 years old. I mean, I would never allow my children ever to do something like that. And back then, that was just kind of what the norm was,
Did you start getting in trouble at an early age?
Absolutely. I started from a young age. I was getting into trouble. Growing up where I did, in the Bay Area, it was a different place at the time. Growing up, it was always fighting and doing those things. Growing up in the environment that I grew up in, those kind of belief systems kind of become a part of your core belief system when you grow up that way. And so that was really what it was. And so, I started getting in trouble from an early age. I started doing drugs at a young age, probably when I definitely started smoking pot when I was 10, but I got into the harder drugs by the time I was 13. It was already full blown by that time.
Did you get in trouble with the police?
Absolutely. I was in juvenile hall at an early age. At 13 years old, I went to juvenile hall. That's when I started going. I graduated later down the road to the more extreme stuff. I went to the California Youth Authority, which is a very dangerous place at a young age. I was 14 when I went to California Youth Authority. Later down the road, they sent me to a place called Rites of Passage. It was basically, it's a boot camp for juveniles. It wasn't even in California. It was out in the Nevada desert by Susanville. And it was so extreme what they did there that the federal government actually came in there and shut it down because of the extremity of what this place was and how they dealt with us as children, so.
What kind of things were they doing?
So it wasn't like any other kind of boot camp that you could even imagine. They had people there called coaches. Their job was to basically beat you down and make you submit. And that was what their idea is, to make people start trying to fall in line. Everything there was based on like physical activity, but not like a normal physical activity, like extreme physical activity. When you woke up in the morning, you had to run at like 5 o'clock in the morning, 3.5 miles before you even got breakfast. And if you didn't make it in the certain amount of times, then you were in trouble, and you didn't get to eat what everybody else got to eat. You had to eat some other not such good food. And it was like punishment for you. And that was how it was. And it was literally like all day long physical activities. They had these things called 1820s, and it was literally 18 different exercises that you would do. And you would do 20 reps of each exercise as it went through. And that was just basically for anything. You even looked at somebody wrong, they're like, you know, give me 5 18-20s. And so if you got to do an 18-20, you're going to do all 18 of those exercises, 20 reps each, 5 times. So, and that's kind of how they were about everything. They even had it to where it was so far out that in order to run from there, I mean, you had to try to run 30 miles across the desert. And people, you know, they attempted it, and they actually had people that would chase you down on horses and lasso you up like back in the day and throw you over the horse and drag you back. I mean, that's what the place was. And it was pretty extreme, man, to be honest with you.
Did you see kids that couldn't make it, that were like out of shape or things like that, that were like physically couldn't do these things?
There was some, and then there was kids like me where, I mean, I went there and I was just like, I'm not doing this no matter what you guys are talking about. And they put me in, they got a place called Specials if you didn't, you know, basically follow their program. And I just didn't care. I wasn't doing it. So I just fought them all the way through until they finally just got tired of me and they kicked me out. And what they did is they sent me to a group home for children that was actually a drug rehab called Our Family. And it was on the Napa State Hospital grounds in California. And it wasn't juvenile. It was adult and juvenile. And it was co-ed. So the amount of disgusting things that happened in this place with adults having sexual intercourse with underage kids, I mean, it was absolutely the worst place possible, which also, because of how it was, the federal government came in and shut this place down too. So it was really not a good situation for anybody, in the way that their idea of helping people to get out of drugs and do these things, some of the stuff that they did there was just terrible. It really was. It was terrible. These places, they had a thing like the hot seat where they would just put somebody on there and they would take somebody's, basically their dirty laundry, something that somebody would basically never want to tell anybody. And if they did tell somebody, it would be because it's like you trusted them with this secret, you know, type of stuff where they're literally putting people on the hot seat and talking about, you know, people getting molested and where their addiction took them, whether it took them to prostitution or these things. And they would literally like put them in the seat and just shame them. And everybody in the room would just be like talking at this person. And these people had to sit there and endure this stuff. And this is kind of what their ideology was at this place, to try to help people. And it was really, I mean, it was so terrible there. It just made things worse for people, and it made other things happen. Like I said, this intercourse with minors and just all the other things. You know, I was 14 years old at the time there, and I don't know how many, you know, 40, 50-year-old women were hitting on me there. I'm a 14-year-old kid, and sure, you know, as a boy, you think, oh, this is great, but really it's not. It's disgusting. It's all part of that revolving door that happens with these things, you know?
So what's it like for a white kid to walk into some of these detention facilities? Because I know it's not all white kids in there, right?
No, absolutely not. I've been through these systems, different systems now. I'm 49 years old, and as an adult, I've spent 26 years in prison altogether. So which means that more than half my life has been spent in prison. So, you know, I've been in federal prison. I did some time in Washington State, up in Walla Walla, and that's a dangerous place there. That's a real prison, man, let me tell you. And, you know, I've done obviously a bunch of time here in Oregon. You come into these places as a child. You know, I went to prison the first time. I was 21 years old. I ended up in a maximum security federal prison. I went to Atlanta. When you talk about that, as far as on the East Coast, especially in the federal prisons, I mean, you know, as a white boy, you know, I was definitely the minority in these places. You walk into these places and you think that you have an idea of something, and you really don't understand anything. And you learn a different type of respect, not only for yourself, but for people around you when you step into these spots where real violence is present, right? Real violence is present. So when you're walking around in these places and you're having to look over your shoulder and understand that at any possible moment, your life could be taken from you for nothing. It changes the way that you walk around and the way that you view things.
And a lot of people on the street don't understand that. I think that's why the internet is people are so disrespectful. Because if they were acted the way they act out here, in there, they wouldn't stand a chance.
Right. It was one of the big things for me coming out of prison, having to deal with these young kids and stuff going on out here, and the respect level that they have. It was a culture shock for me how people are. I mean, people are disrespectful now. There's things going on in the world that I never thought that I would ever see. You know, I was driving down the road and literally seeing somebody, you know, doing a right there in the bus stop where everybody can see, and just didn't care. And I just, you know, back in the day, anybody that I was involved with, any of my homeboys or anything, ever try to act like that, you know, they would have got handled for something like that, because it's disrespectful to people. It puts, you know, it brings heat and it does all these things, but people just don't care anymore. That's what's so crazy about it. I mean, you can just be walking and, you know, somebody will bump into you and they look at you like you did something, and then they don't even want to say, excuse me. People in prison get, you know, smashed out for that 100%. It's just, you know, it's wild to think that, to go from that out here to where you're trying to come out here, do the right thing. And you're like, my God, these guys just, I don't have it in me all the time to, you know, I'm trying to be the best version of myself that I can, but I just don't have it in me all the time to just let somebody come up and disrespect my wife or my children, you know what I mean? Or my 97-year-old grandmother. You know, when people start doing things like this, you got to really, you know, it's hard, man. It's hard to not snatch somebody up and put them down on the ground, you know, and tell them, hey, man, that's not cool. I don't like that. So it's real difficult.
So you recently got out of prison, right? And
yes,
from what I seen, I don't think you should have went to prison for as long as you did for what happened.
Right. So, and that's
you want to explain what happened?
Absolutely. I'm not a saint by any kinds of means, right? By no means. I take responsibility for the things that I've done in my life. When I moved up here from California when I was 18, you know, I came up and I was in a really bad spot in my head coming up here. You know, my father and my grandmother, you know, they lived in Vancouver area, which is by Portland. I came up here because I watched the Grass Valley Police in California murder my best friend. And it was plain and simple. That's what it was. It was murder, man. They were looking for him. The cops showed up. And this is in the early 90s. You got to understand, right? So back then, fanny sacks were still a thing. He came out of the house. The cop told him to take off his fanny sack. As soon as he reached for it, he shot him and killed him right in front of me. I watched the whole thing happen. And this was the guy, we talked about me going to juvenile hall. When I went to juvenile hall when I was 13 years old, Damien, which is who got killed and was my best friend. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional talking about this. I apologize.
That's all right.
You know, he took me under his wing and he was the one that looked out for me. So he was like my older brother. I watched the cops kill him and it put me into a very strange spot. So when I moved up here, I was lost. So I got involved into the gang life when I came up here. I wasn't by any kind of means. I don't want anybody to think out there that when I explain about what happened, that I was some sort of saint and blameless in the situation. But the facts are the facts, is that the guy was trying to rip me off. He came into the house, you know, he got killed.